Right, well, morning everybody. Morning. I can't believe that this day's actually arrived. Andy Genders phoned me. Where is Andy Genders?
Hiding.
Oh, there he is, back row. Right on the back row there. How long ago was it when you phoned me to say, do you want to do this study? It feels a long time ago.
I think we first spoke when you were speaking at
You forgot?
Henry's baptism.
Oh, yes. So we're going back a long time. It feels like 3 or 4 years ago. So I said yes, thinking that we wouldn't be here, of course, because I thought Jesus would be back by now. And he isn't back by now. So, of course, we're a lot closer, aren't we, to Jesus coming back. But then the reality hit me about 2 months ago that I have now got to get underway with this and put together that you didn't tell me to start with it was going to be 5 talks. I'm sure you didn't say that. But so that was okay, including exhortation, there's 5 talks. So this is quite a big journey, isn't it? I've never done 5 talks over 2 days ever. And that is I promise you, it's a lot to get your head around. To the extent that, and this, I'm not exaggerating at all in what I'm about to say, for the last 4 to 5 weeks, every single solitary night that I've gone to bed, I have played through my mind something to do with the tabernacle. Every single solitary night for at least 4 to 5 weeks. Every morning I've woken up still thinking about the tabernacle as I've woken up. As I've been driving along at work, I've switched the radio off and started thinking about the tabernacle. I'm walking Muffin the dog around Brazen Hill where we live, and I found myself, I lost her twice because I was just in my own world thinking about the tabernacle. I've prayed to God every single solitary day for at least a month about the tabernacle, asking if he would help me to understand what's going on, and to give me some insight. You know, I'm sure we all pray these things. And for all of those reasons, I'm actually now extremely appreciative of that phone call, because do you know something? If Andy hadn't phoned me and said, would you do this talk? Do you think for the last 4 or 5 weeks I would have thought about these things that much? I wouldn't have done. So it's been an amazing, absolutely amazing thing. It really has. My job, I think, is to try and transpose some of the stuff that I've been looking at and thinking about and praying about consistently while still trying to hold down a job for the last 4 or 5 weeks. And to be fair, it isn't just the last 4 or 5 weeks. You're going to get, at the end of this whole thing, quite 8 pages of lots and lots of notes. And the bulk of it was some articles that I wrote for the CIL a while ago now. Maybe that's probably 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. So I would say make some notes anyway, but you're going to get, I'm not going to give it you now though, because if I gave you all my notes right now, you would steal all my thunder. Do you know what I mean? So I'm going to give you all the notes at the end. But you will get pretty much the whole thing, all the verses, and it's all written out so that you can read it, almost like a story. Okay? So, are you all happy with where we are so far? So we're going to have a look at this tabernacle. Now, the tabernacle, I would put to you, and again, I don't think I'm exaggerating here, it is, without any shadow of a doubt, the greatest, the absolute greatest symbolic representation of God's plan and purpose in the whole of the Bible. There isn't really even a close second. Everything else drops somewhere down here. It is unbelievable amounts of detail. 15 chapters just in Exodus alone with intricate detail of how to build this thing. It is the most wondrous allegory that you will find anywhere in the Bible. And of course that sort of makes sense because, as we all know, this is all to do with the worship of God on earth. But it's actually a lot more than just the worship of God on earth, as we'll see. But it is all to do with the worship of God on earth. So actually it makes some sort of sense that it is the most incredible, detailed allegory, symbolic representation of everything to do with God and his plan and his purpose. So I think it's worth saying that at the start. So we're going to have 4 talks, and the 5th one being the exhortation, still, believe it or not, on this subject. And I'm telling you now, we will only just scratch the surface on this. You know, if I've dealt with 0.1% of the wonder of it, that's probably all I've done. Because there are so many layers. There's so much that we could do. And part of it is inspiring me and you to keep looking at this. Because in 5 talks, it's just like a tiny, tiny introduction to it in 5 talks. So this first one is called Back to the Future. And you'll see why I've called it Back to the Future when we get to the end, well, probably somewhere a little bit early on in the talk itself. I think you'll probably see why we've called it Back to the Future. Has anybody done any exercise this morning, apart from Mark Bateman, who was sweating so hot? I put my arm around him. I thought, wow, the heat coming off Mark Bateman's unbelievable. He says, I've already cycled 100 miles. I've swam a few kilometres. Anybody done any exercises? Who goes down the gym? Who basically does a bit of exercise down the gym in the room? We've got 1 person. Now you're all owning up. Okay, so there's a few of you. Who goes out cycling? Who goes? Oh, now all of you. Look at this. Withal cycling mecca, isn't it? This is what it is. What do you do? What's one of the key things that you should do before you do some form of exercise? Eat. Yeah. Let's warm up. The reason you want to warm up is because if you just jump straight in, then you're going to pull something. And I suddenly thought to myself, hold on a minute, we've got some serious mental, spiritual exercise going on over 5 talks here. If we just leap straight in, this isn't a great idea. We've got to warm up. We've got to stretch our brain muscles a bit. Do you think? Have you ever done a warm-up before in a talk? You never have you? But I think this is a good idea. So we're going to do a warm-up. And we are going to get our brains in the zone, all right? That's what we're going to do. Because if we just leapt straight into the tabernacle, your brain's still full of work and full of kids and grandkids. I'm talking about my own life now. And, it's too much. So we're going to start very simply and gently. Because your warm-up isn't lifting, 100 kg, is it? It's like, a little bit of gentle stuff. So here we go with the warm-up. All right, so this actually, why I picked this picture, I don't honestly know. It's a photograph I took. It's not the sort of photograph that I can take like Pete Turton would take in Dubai. This is my holiday in Mallorca. This is Formentor Beach. I picked this picture because it's actually quite simple. There's not much on it. Can you just tell me, this isn't a trick question, by the way, can you just tell me what you can see on this picture? We got the sea, we got the beach, we can see a boat, we can see a hill, yes, we see sand, there's a pier, gentle lapping waves. It's not a very sunny day, it's a bit of a depressing picture. Bit of seaweed. Can you see? There's a bloke there. I just noticed this the other day. I thought, what is he doing? It was quite warm, but it was cloudy. He's obviously from the UK. He's thinking, I've jetted out to Mallorca. I'm just going to lie on the beach. All right. So there we are. Pretty simple picture. Now, here's what I want you to do. You don't realise this at the minute, but on your laps, you have got something called God spectacles. So if you can just pick them up, they're invisible. Can you just put them on like this for me? I've got mine on now. You've got to physically do it. I'm not messing around. This is serious. Have you all put your God spectacles on? Mark has put some real spectacles on upside down. Great. So, all right. Now, doesn't that look different? Do you see how amazing these God spectacles are? It transforms things unbelievably when you put God spectacles on. Because what we're now doing is looking at this picture through the lens of God's viewpoint. We're looking at this picture now through the lens of symbology. We're looking at it through the lens of what God sees. Now, actually, on here, of course, we've got lots of things that are symbolic of other things in the Bible, aren't they? So somebody tell me, let's start with the sea, as that was the first thing that somebody called out. In the Bible, what is the sea symbolic of? Nations. Yes. So the sea is symbolic of nations. Where does it tell us that the sea is symbolic of nations? Isaiah in Revelation. Luke 21, we've got the sea and the waves roaring. That's a great big... And by the way, the sea is symbolic of nations and the waves are symbolic of people. That's a little study you might want to look at. But anyway, so there we've got the nations. So instead of us looking at the sea, we now see nations. What about the sand? What's the sand symbolic of in the Bible? Israel. Any more than just Israel? Abraham's descendants, Abraham's seed. Where does it tell us that? Genesis chapter 12 and other places. So we now look at this and we now see the sand as actually not just sand. We see it as the descendants of Abraham. In other words, the saints really, isn't it? Right? Interestingly, there's the sand and what else? What's the other thing he says? You'll be like the sand and the stars. Amazingly, there's two websites you can look this up on. One has tried to estimate the number of grains of sand on planet Earth, and the other one, totally separate NASA site, has tried to estimate the number of stars in the sky. And unbelievably, they've come up with almost an identical figure. Now stop and think about that. Because the grains of sand on planet Earth equal the numbers of stars in the sky. Who would have thought? I mean, this is mind-blowing. I tell you, the other amazing thing then, of course, is that it tells us that God knows the name of every single solitary star. That would be like God naming every single solitary grain of sand on that beach. The next time you pick up some sand in your hand on the beach, Pete will be doing it tomorrow on the Dubai beaches, no doubt. Pete, when you get there, do me a favour, pick up some sand and look at it. In just the palm of your hand, there's hundreds of thousands of grains. Every one is equivalent to a star, and every one God knows by name. And you add up all the beaches on planet Earth, and you add up the Sahara Desert and all grains of sand. It is unbelievable, is it not? Wow. Why has he named them? We'll find out one day. What should we go for? What do you want to do next? Mountain. So let's look at mountain. I heard mountain just first. We'll do trees, but let's do mountain. Let's call this a mountain. What's a mountain symbolic of in the Bible?
Filling the earth with God's glory.
Filling the earth with God's glory, yes, because we're told, aren't we, that the little stone is going to grow and grow and grow into a great mountain. Good one. Anything else? Where do mountains crop up and what do we think they might be symbolic of? Definitely God's glory. Being closer to God, I think, is a very good answer, because you think about it, there's Jesus. Where did he go and pray very often? Mountain. Sermon on the... His whole sermon began on the top of a mountain. Moses, come up to the mountain. I'm going to give you the commandments. It's all to do with mountains. So we can look at this and think about being closer to God. Here's a more tricky one. Boats. What's a boat symbolic of in the Bible? Fellowship is good. Even the word ship gives it away, doesn't it? All right, fellowship. In fact, you're absolutely right. It's an interesting study because the Bible doesn't say that a boat is equal to fellowship. It doesn't ever say that. But it's littered with clues that that's exactly right. In fact, it's littered with clues that it's actually symbolic of ecclesias. If you think about it, this little ship here is sailing around on what symbolically? The nations of the world. And this ship, we're told in Hebrews, are we not, that we have somebody called a captain. By the way, there were no aeroplanes. There wasn't a captain back when Paul wrote Hebrews. So the only captain he was talking about, and it wasn't captains of football teams either, it was the captain of a boat. That's the word that he is referring to today. It's somebody that would be the captain of a vessel, of a boat. And Jesus is the captain of our salvation. In other words, he's on board HMS Withal. And we're a particular type of boat, by the way. We're a fishing boat. And we go around the nations of the world, and what's our job? Catching fish, who are symbolically men. And we're pulling them out the nations of the... Do you see what's happening here? What's happening here is this. With God's spectacles on, what is just a scene that we're just looking at saying it's a nice day, or not so nice. Suddenly, with God's spectacles on, you suddenly see God's plan and purpose all around you. And I'm telling you, this is a good idea to do. Every single day from here on in, think to yourself, I'm just going to put God's spectacles on right now. Now what do I see? And you realise it doesn't matter where you are or what you're doing, you will convert the world around you into God's plan and purpose instantly. You look at the clouds, you look at the sun, you look at the moon. You look at the trees, you look at the grass, you look at the motorway that you're on. You look at the path, you look at the door, you look at your food, you look at creatures. It doesn't matter what you look at, you will convert it into God's plan and purpose. And suddenly it feels close. Everything is closer to you. It's interesting, isn't it? Why has God done that? Why has he converted everything, and I mean everything, into symbolic pictures? Because he knows that it helps us to understand his plan and purpose. Jesus spoke in parables. God talks in real things that he has made that you convert into real life. We're talking now about real life when we look at the future, aren't we, of God's plan and purpose? This really isn't real life. This is going to pass away. The bit that will replace it are the things that we've just talking about. God's seed, the kingdom of God on earth, being close to God, his glory, the very people that we've fished out, all of those things are real. The kingdom, of course, will be a sea made like what? Glass. There won't even be a ripple in the kingdom. The nations will be so perfectly smooth, there won't be all this fighting and raging of waters and waves in the kingdom. Are your brains warming up now? Do you see what I mean? Now, when we come to the tabernacle, it's exactly the same situation. But God has manufactured things, it's the tree, but he manufactured the tree. He manufactured the waves. He manufactured the sand. He's manufactured this and asked us to make it. But every single solitary thing with God's spectacles on, keep them on, by the way. You haven't taken them off, have you? Keep them on, because everything here is symbolic. So we've started off in Exodus chapter 25, have we not? Hopefully your Bibles are sort of open there. I'm a bit conscious that, I've got verses on the screen and we've got Bibles on our laps, and there's a temptation that everything's on the screen and we don't look at our Bibles. So try and do both if you can. But here we are in Exodus 25 verse 8, that God says, "Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them." That's the number one thing that we've got to start thinking about here, is that this is all about God dwelling amongst the people. What does the word sanctuary mean? Good one. Holy place. That's what it is, a separate place. God says, I'm not just going to dwell anywhere. I want to dwell in a holy place, in a separate place for me. Verse 9, I think, comes up next. It does. According to all that I will show you after the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all the instruments, it says. I think Andrew read furniture. That's what it means. The pattern of all the furniture thereof, even so shall you make it. What does tabernacle mean? Dwelling place. It means a dwelling place. So the tabernacle is so God says, I want to dwell with you in a separate holy place, in a tabernacle. In other words, I want you to make a dwelling for me. Just so happens, to start with, it was a tent. It converted into an actual temple down the line, didn't it? And ultimately it's going to convert into something far, far more interesting than either a tent or a building. If we were going to design a dwelling, what you probably find to start with is a plot of land, wouldn't you? And then you'd draw out what you want it to look like. You'd sketch out where the kitchen is and bits and pieces, and then you'd start putting in furniture around the place, and you'd fill it up with the stuff, wouldn't you? What you probably wouldn't do is say, well, look, here's the bed, right? And here's this bit of furniture here. This is what we're starting with. And now what I want you to do is to build around the furniture. Do you see what I'm saying? You wouldn't do that. You start off and then you fill it with the furniture. Now, the very strange thing is, God said that I want you to build me a tabernacle. That's what we just read in verse 9. And you would think, wouldn't you, that he would say, right, now here's what I want you to build. Here's the tent, or here's the courtyard, or here's the building. Now put the furniture in it. Do you think he did it that way? Well, he didn't. In Exodus 25, verse 9, it says, this is how you're going to make it. This is how I want you to make it. Look, even so you shall make it. In modern versions, it says, this is how you will make it. Brilliant. We're going to make a dwelling. Moses is being told all of this. I'm going to make a dwelling. Lo and behold, he doesn't tell them about the dwelling, the tent. He starts with the Ark of the Covenant in verse 10. My Bible's really good, actually, because it puts little headings above when the subject changes. So I don't know whether yours does that, but just before verse 10, it says the Ark of the Covenant. Has anybody got something else coming next? When's the next thing that's big? The Ark, yeah, you got the Ark of the Testament, the Ark of the Covenant. What's the next thing that comes down the line? The table of showbread. What verse is that? 23. What's next? We got the lampstand, or the candlestick, in verse 31. And then finally we come on to the tabernacle in chapter 26. And then it keeps going. In Exodus 27, we run out of space on here, but then we've got the altar burnt offering, and eventually we get to the courtyard. In other words, God starts with the ark and is moving in this direction. He's actually moving outwards, isn't he, if you think about it? He's starting in the centre of it, and then he's gradually coming outwards and building things around it, and then coming further out and further out. But the strange thing is that when you come to Exodus 36, and this is when they start putting it all together, do you think they follow this order? Well, the answer is they don't. The making of it, in verse 8, if we were looking at Exodus 36, they start with the tabernacle. It's interesting. God starts here, they start there. And then they make the Ark of the Covenant and the table of showbread and the candlestick. And so it's following the other way round. God says start with this, or this is what I want you to make. And when they actually make it, they're making it in the other order. That's quite interesting, I think. So here's some of the key things that are being put together to make up this tabernacle. The first thing that we're told about is this, which is... And then we get this, which is... the tabernacle itself. We haven't talked about this. The laver filled with... the altar of burnt offering. The altar of incense we haven't put onto this slide. That comes about here, actually, and there's a veil. So it's not all the things. But this is the order that God talks about. What comes after? What do you think comes after this? The altar burnt offering? No. The courtyard. So there's two altars that we'll see properly. I'm just giving you a very quick overview. There's an altar of incense here, and outside in the courtyard there's an altar of burnt offering, and then there's so that is basically. If you read it, we haven't got time to read all of it, but that is the order that God tells them to make it. But when they actually make it, they come more this way. They're following this way, backwards. And what we're going to see later is that it's super significant about the direction of travel with all of this. So we're going to find that God is telling them from a west to east direction, but when they come back in, they're going from east to west. That's very, very, very significant. We'll look at that later. Why do you think God did it this way round? Why didn't he start with the courtyard and work this way in to the final conclusion of this, which this has got to be the ultimate, hasn't it? This Ark of the Covenant, whatever this is. Why didn't he start there and go this way? Why do you think he started here?
Because he is all holy and all those
omni words, yes, omniscient and omnipresent,
and then he moved outwards to sin. So from perfect to imperfect, where we're going from imperfect to perfect.
That's a good way of thinking of it. I like that. All right. Yeah, I think we're on the right lines. Here is how I would explain this. In Isaiah chapter 46, it says, "Remember the former things of old. I am God, there is none else. I am God, and there is none like me. But look what God does. He declares the end from the beginning." Do you think God does that? Declares the end from the beginning? In other words, I'm going to tell you the final conclusion of it all. When I open my mouth and talk to you, I'm going to tell you the end of the story at the very start. Is that how in our sort of language we would say that? Do you think, in a sense, that the Ark of the Covenant might be the end of the story, not the beginning? It's not all ending in sin and disaster, is it? God's plan and purpose isn't about ending with man in a sinful mess. God's plan and purpose is ending with something much better than that, isn't it? And the Ark of the Covenant is telling us God's plan and purpose and the conclusion of it at the very, very beginning. And therefore, what we're going to spend just a couple of minutes on, and the fourth talk, by the way, will absolutely expand on this massively, but I just want you to understand what the Ark of the Covenant is actually all about, because it is the very, very centre of it all. So what do we know about this Ark of the Covenant? Is that if that's where God starts and he's declaring the end from the beginning, what do we know about it? In Exodus 25 verse 22, it says, "There I will meet with you," talking about in the most holy place, talking about the Ark of the Covenant. "I will meet with you. I will commune with you from above the mercy seat, from between the two cherubims which are upon the Ark of Testimony." All right? So we find out that it's all to do with God meeting us, communing with us, and being between the two cherubims. But please keep your God spectacles on. This isn't what it's all about. It isn't just about God dwelling in a tent for a few years in the wilderness. This is actually a symbolic picture of something massive, something enormous, something incredible. In Isaiah 37, verse 16, we read, "Lord of hosts, God of Israel, that dwells between the cherubims." So God is dwelling between the two cherubims that are on top of the ark, beaten out of the same piece of gold that the mercy seat was formed of. "For thou art God, even thou alone of all the kingdoms of the earth. Thou hast made heaven and earth." And he's dwelling between the cherubims on the ark. We read in Hebrews chapter 9, verse 5, that over it the cherubims of glory overshadowing the mercy seat. So there's glory involved, isn't there? There's a bright shining light between these two cherubim. Can anybody think, of these key words that we've got on here that has something to do with the future plan and purpose of God? Can anybody think of a verse or some verses in the Bible that talk about God meeting with us, dwelling with us, and there being glory? Revelation chapter. Does this sound similar to you? Revelation 21. We're right at the very end. We're right at the very end of the Bible. "I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle." Oh, interesting. The tabernacle of God is with men. He will dwell, interesting, with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and shall be their God, and God will wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there'll be no more death. No more sorrow, no more crying, no more pain. The former things are passed away. When do you think that actually happens? When is this verse here and this verse here? When does that actually happen? Did we say the end of the millennium? Yeah. That's the answer. So final destination. Do you see how this links to the Ark of the Covenant? The Ark of the Covenant, with God dwelling with man in glory on this earth, is the final conclusion of the story as far as we know it. We know nothing past that point. This is the final conclusion of it all. And God began with the final conclusion of it all because the whole tabernacle and the whole of this symbolic journey is to get to this place in reality. It is to get to this place in reality. Now, I want to just explain one little thing here, because I'm not entirely certain, perhaps, that we all fully grasp the importance and the wonder of what we've just read. In Numbers 14, we read that truly as I live, all the earth will be filled with the glory of the Lord. We know that. In Habakkuk 2, verse 14, the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord. And so, the picture here of the Ark of the Covenant with God's glory between it is exactly the future picture that God says is the final conclusion of it all. In other words, I will dwell on earth and the whole earth will be filled with my glory. Now, here's what you might not appreciate. When it says that God will tabernacle and will dwell with man and be with man, that means that God will dwell on earth here physically. God, you know, is not some ethereal power source of just bright light. Jesus is not sat on the right-hand side of a power mass, a loving power mass. He is sat on the right-hand side of something that is looking human. Jesus is made in God's image, not only from a character point of view, but God actually looks like us. And the angels look like us. And the angels look like God. God has actually got form. John actually tells us that God has got form. And the form of God is something that looks like a human being. You know when it says that God is invisible? You say, well, there you are. You can't see God. It's just like power. No. The word invisible literally means unseen in the Greek. So God is unseen. We can't see him. But one day God himself will descend to this earth when this earth has been put right and dwell on earth with man and live with man. And he can only do that when this world has got no sin, no death, no temptation, nothing wrong with it at all. And his destination, the God of all things, you might say it says that God is a spirit. It says that God is spirit. And spirit is not saying that God is some ghostly, ethereal thing. It doesn't mean that. The word spirit means power. It means truth as well. God is power and God is truth. God is love. But God is a real being. When he stretches out his hand, he's got hands. He's got eyes. He's got ears. If we were to look upon him, I know it's hard for us to comprehend this, but he looks like us. And when it says that I will dwell on earth with man, I promise you that his destination is planet Earth, unbelievably. But he can't come here until all things have been sorted out. And this whole journey of the tabernacle is simply God telling us in symbolic form how that is going to happen. That's it. So the tabernacle itself and this incredible journey that we're going to look at, and this here is all going back to the future. God says, I'll tell you the future at the start and you're going to walk back to this. You're going to end up here. And it isn't just me dwelling sort of in some sort of ethereal thing with just a bright light between some two cherubim. Do you think this is the final conclusion? It isn't. It's God actually dwelling on earth with man. And if we understand that, then the rest of it makes a whole heap of sense. Now, as Pete said, that the mercy seat was all to do with Christ. And we're told that it isn't only the mercy seat that's to do with Christ. It's all to do with Christ. Because guess what? For God to come and dwell on earth with man, he's got to clear out sin. He's got to clear out death. He's even got to clear out darkness, ultimately. The only reason we're sat in a universe with uncountless miles of darkness, all that will go. The heavens will roll up like a scroll one day and disappear. in terms of the darkness. God won't dwell in darkness. The darkness has been put there to separate us right now from his presence. That's the only reason that the universe is there. But Christ being come and high priest of good things to come by a greater and more perfect tabernacle. You see, everything here is to do with Christ. God's plan and purpose was absolutely, totally predicated on Jesus achieving what he achieved, i.e. overcoming sin and his temptations. All of these things are to do with Jesus. So what we're going to do now is have a walk through this tabernacle. We've got a few... What time does this session finish? Was it 5:15?
Let's be 5:15. We did start 5 minutes late.
Oh, you're lovely. I like this. All right. So why don't we walk through this? I found a video of the tabernacle. Should we go and have a walk through? Let's do it. Here we go. This is a tabernacle walkthrough. Okay, so here we are. We're outside the tabernacle. This is the courtyard coming up here. There's only one way into the tabernacle, and that's going through here, which is actually called a gate, which is a bit strange because it isn't a gate. It's just some curtains. This is on the east side, by the way. So we're now going to walk in through what the Bible calls a gate, and we're now going into the courtyard. So before us, the first thing we see is, what's this? The altar of burnt offering, absolutely. The brazen altar. This is where animals would have been killed around here and burnt to nothing, basically, on here. This burnt all the time, never went out, burning, burning, burning. You can feel the heat. Feel that? Right, now we come past that. Now what's this coming up here? Here's the laver, full of water. The priests had to wash what at this point? Hands and feet. If they didn't wash hands and feet at this point, then they would just die instantly. They went into this. So we now go through some curtains. So there's some curtains here at the front of the tabernacle. So we're going to go into the tabernacle now itself. It's a lot different in here, to be fair, because everything we're looking at now is gold. Everything outside, by the way, was made of brass. The bronze altar, the laver was made of bronze. The walls are gold. The table's gold. Where are we going now? What's happening? We're swinging around. Okay, let's have a look at the table. So here's the table. Look, this. What's this? Table of showbread. You see the loaves on there? There's 12 loaves. All these walls are wood covered in gold. We'll cover all of this, all right, when we get to it. So all this is gold. The floor is just the floor, all right. That's just on the ground. There was no covering. We just stood on planet Earth. This is where we've just come in. We've just come in through this. The curtains are shut again. Here's the south side of the wall. What's this? Or the menorah, absolutely. So that burns 24/7. It never, ever, ever goes out. This is the veil. So this is separating what we're in now, which is the holy place, from the most holy place. What's this? The altar of incense. This also burns it smells nice in here. It smells really nice. This is beautiful scent coming off here. And they're burning it all the time. We're going to have a look and see how they made it and what they burnt and why they burnt it, and because it's all made up of certain things. Made out of gold, again. And now we're going to go past the altar of incense and we're going into... Where are we going into? The most holy place. So we go through that veil. And here, it's bright in here. Whoa, it's very, very bright. There's no candles burning in here, but there's a bright, bright, bright light shining, God's glory, isn't it, between the cherubim. These things on the floor here should be inside this box here, but they've put some things on the floor which actually should be inside the box, because the Ark of the Covenant is nothing more or nothing less than a box. And we'll look at all these things. You know, when we're nearing the end of the whole journey, when we get to this bit, which will be called the talk of heaven. Heaven is a place on earth. So anyway, we're walking back out now, and you can see what's going on. So that's the journey, isn't it? Out from outside, going in. All right, let's just stop that for a minute, for now. Now, what I want to do is, in the last sort of 10 minutes of this talk, convert what we've just seen into who do you think? Jesus. We're going to convert what we've just seen into Jesus. Do you want to do that? Right, let's do it. Okay. Now there's a little bit to get through, but let's do it. So we are outside, aren't we now? We're in this wilderness area. And we're going to think why we would go on this journey a little bit later on, all right? But let's just presume we're going to go on this journey. I'm sat out here in the wilderness, and we're going to head through into the tabernacle, yeah? So the whole thing starts with a journey. Can anybody think of, this might be a bit tricky, but can anybody think of Jesus saying something about, I am something, which sounds like a journey? I am the way. So in John chapter 14, verse 6, Jesus says, I am the way. He doesn't say, actually, there's a few different ways you can approach God. There's a couple of ways. I'm one of them. And actually, there's another way. He doesn't. He just says, I am the way. He actually says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. In other words, ultimately, if you follow me, you will end up with life. Is that the ultimate destination? It is. Life on earth with God and Christ. So anyway, Jesus says, I am the way. And that is right at the beginning of what we're looking at. I am the way. And now we come to this here. Now this is, let's have a look. This is have a look at Exodus 27, verse 16. Somebody read that to me.
What verse do you want?
27, verse 16.
27 verse 16 reads, For the gate of the court there shall be a screen 20 cubits long, woven of blue, purple, and scarlet thread, and fine woven linen made by a weaver. It shall have 4 pillars and 4 sockets.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. You notice all the colours. We've got blue, purple, scarlet. Blue is the colour of the priest. Purple is the colour of the king. And scarlet is the colour of sin, right? So that's why there's those. We'll talk more about colours and things later. But here we've got a gate. Now it's ever so strange, as I said to you before, that it's called a gate. Because does it look like a gate? It doesn't really look like a gate. It just looks like curtains draped. And that's all it was. And they moved the curtains to one side. And God says it's a gate. Can anybody think of a verse where Jesus sounds a little bit like he's saying that he's like a gate?
I am the door.
I am the door. Do you know where he says that?
John 10.
Brilliant. I am the door, John chapter 10. If you've got a modern translation, guess what it says? It doesn't say I am the door in John 10 verse 9. If you've got a modern version, what does it say? Have a look if you've got, some of you will have a modern version.
I am the door.
Oh, brilliant. Brilliant. Failed. I am the gate. What version? NIV, the Naughty International Version. Excellent. I am the gate. Brilliant. No, it's great. All versions are great. We look at the versions and it helps. Can you see? God says there's a gate. Jesus actually, because when you look at John chapter 10 verse 8, he's talking about the gate of the sheep. He said there's a gate. You wouldn't like put sheep in a house with a door. You would put sheep in a pen with a gate. So actually the Greek word is much better translated as gate than door. I don't mind either way. But what we're saying is here, can you see that Jesus says, I am this? I am this gate. I am the way, and then I am also this gate. I am this door. And that's exactly what he's referring to. What's the next thing that we encounter when we come through here? What are we going to see? The altar of burnt offering. All right. Come and have a look at John chapter 10. Oh, another John. That's interesting, isn't it? Another John. And by the way, those two phrases, I am the way, the truth, the life, I am the door, only appear in John, as does this next one. So John chapter 10, verse 11, pretty quickly after the door, you notice, in verse 9 that we've just looked at, there it is, I am the door, I am the gate. He then says in verse 11, straight after it, what? I am the good shepherd who does what? gives his life. What do you think this is all about? Sacrifice, which is giving of your life. So I think when Jesus says, I am the good shepherd that gives his life, we've gone through the way, we've started on the way, we've gone through his door, and we'll look at how this all impacts with us later. But I am the good shepherd that gives his life. Interesting. Let's just, because of time, let's just have a look at the tabernacle. Now, the tabernacle itself, we won't look this up, but it says here in Hebrews 9 verse 11, we've already looked at it, talking about Jesus, who is a greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands. So we know Jesus is definitely this tabernacle, don't we? Because Hebrews says Jesus is the perfect tabernacle. So now let's go in, right? Here we go. Now, what have we got in here? Is there anything in here that, you're on the right lines now, aren't you? You're on the sort of zone of where we are. Anything to do with this, where Jesus said, I am something that might be a little bit like this? Oh, now we're on to it. No, yes, this is great. I can do this one. John chapter 8, verse 12. The only time, by the way, Jesus says, I am the light of the world, is in John. And here it is in John chapter 8, verse 12. I am the light of the world. I put the word there. Right, should say the world. Freudian slip on that one, I think. Jesus also, on this lamp that we're going to look at later, what are these things called that are coming off either side of the lampstand? Branches. Can anybody think of anything to do with branches and Jesus saying, I am the branch, yeah. I am the true... Come and have a look, John chapter 15. John chapter 15, verse 1, look. What does it say? Somebody want to read verse 1 and 2?
I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. Every branch in me that beareth not fruit, he taketh away.
Uh-huh.
And every branch that beareth fruit, he purgeth.
Right. So Jesus is saying, I'm the true vine, and you are the branches. You see this? So there's a central stem here, and there's branches coming off. The vine actually is all to do with what fruit? Grapes, making wine, and that's also in here, but we'll talk about that later. But leaving the wine on one side just for a minute, what have we got over here that might sound a little bit like Jesus? I am the bread of life. Only mentioned in the Gospel of John, by the way. Interesting. John chapter 6, verse 35, I am the bread of life. Is Jesus inside here? I think he is. Do we think Jesus has got anything to do with the veil, by the way? It was ripped top to bottom. Apparently it was 4 inches thick. The veil, it wasn't in here, but the temple, when they built the temple, it was an enormously much bigger structure, wasn't it, than the tabernacle. And it was something like 60 feet tall, this curtain, and 4 inches thick. They just didn't make it out of flimsy. So when it says that this veil tore from the top to the bottom, and it's symbolic of Christ's flesh, which Hebrews tells us it is, this is some enormous task. A human being could not have torn a 4-inch thick piece of material 60 foot from top to bottom, could they? But that's what happened when Jesus died on the cross. But we go into this bit here, and this bit is all about... What do you think this bit is all about? I'm sorry, I'm going past this bit here. I'm going right into here. I'm actually beyond now. I've gone into the most holy place. Do you think, how would we summarize the most holy place into the presence and glory of God? And it's all to do with ultimately us being saved, isn't it? And dwelling with God one day. And the actual saving bit comes when Christ comes back, isn't it? That's the beginning of God. When Christ comes back, his job is doing nothing more or less than preparing planet Earth for his Father. That's what the kingdom is. The kingdom in 1,000 years is preparing the world for God to come and live here. That's the kingdom. And what do you think Christ does at the end of the 1,000 years? What does our daily reading say today?
Hands it back to God.
Hands it all to God, and God is all and in all. All right? The key things that are happening in here, and we'll look at it when we get into the most holy place, and we'll see what the symbology is, but it's all to do with forgiveness of sin, it's all to do with resurrection, and it's all to do with immortal life on planet Earth. Can anybody think of those key themes that Jesus says, I am? Perfect. John chapter 11, verse 25. I am the resurrection and the life. Only mentioned in John. So what we've got is, I am the way. I am the door. I am the good shepherd that gives his life. I am the light of the world. I am the true vine with the branches. I am the bread of life. I am the resurrection and the life. The 7 I ams mentioned in the Gospel of John, and only in the Gospel of John. 7 is the number of completion, as we know. All of this is to do with Jesus. However, what we'll see after the break is that this is not just about Jesus. It's about me and you and our individual journey getting from our place, wherever we're born into, in planet Earth, getting to one day dwell with God on planet Earth. The second talk is all about getting on, getting in.